Hello friends, today let's talk about starting a restaurant business in Montenegro. If you've been living in Montenegro for some time, you've probably heard from our fellow countrymen the opinion that a foreign-owned cafe in this country cannot be successful. In fact, this opinion was invented and spread by people who, in principle, have never been involved in any kind of business. Well, that's just how it seemed to them, and they start spreading this opinion. What is this misconception based on? There are three myths. The first myth is that Montenegrins are supposedly such terrible dogmatists that they eat the same things and reject anything new. Therefore, opening some kind of new cuisine in this country, one they're not used to, is supposedly just a pointless endeavor. A cafe, no one will go to a cafe just for the sake of it. Opening, for example, an Italian, French, or Mexican restaurant here, well, there's just no chance. The second misconception. The second myth, well, there are more misconceptions. We'll look at them a bit later. I'll tell you, but for now, let's just talk about the myths. The second myth is that Montenegrins are always visited by crowds of friends. So they open a restaurant and then their in-laws, brothers, godfathers, friends, and others all come to visit. But you don't have any in-laws, brothers, or godfathers here, so they won't be coming to you. And the third myth is that, again, these Montenegrins, due to some sort of, well, I don't know, national mindset, don't go to cafes run by foreigners. They only go to places run by their own people. Based on these three myths, many Russian immigrants claim that a foreign-owned cafe in this country cannot be successful. And indeed, all the Russian cafes I know of that have opened in Herceg-Novi over the more than 10 years I've lived here have closed down. But right now, honestly, it's hard for me to count them. Yesterday, while planning this video, I tried to count how many cafes there actually were here. If I haven't forgotten anything, there have been 6 cafes in Herceg-Novi that I remember, 6 Russian cafes, at least the ones I know of. There was also a 7th one, but it was super successful. It wasn't really Russian though, if I'm not mistaken, it was Azerbaijani. And before it was sold, the owners left, they moved to Podgorica. Well, that's what they wanted. As for the other 6, they closed down. So it turns out that everyone who claims it's hard for foreigners to start a business in Montenegro, to open a restaurant business in Montenegro, they're right. So you see, there really were 7 cafes, one of them was successful, and 6 closed down. So maybe it really is difficult, and the idea is doomed to fail. To answer this question, we first need to define what counts as a successful cafe. In my opinion, a successful cafe is one that attracts a large number of people, has regular customers, and also brings in new ones. In other words, a place where there is a steady and healthy flow of people. As a result, the cafe generates good revenue and accordingly brings its owner a good profit. Now, tell me, please, do you know of any good Russian cafe among those that closed in Herceg-Novi? I don't know a single one, not a single one like that. Even the one that, as I already mentioned, was quite successful, owes its success not so much to being truly outstanding, but rather to the fact that it probably had the best location of all possible options. Although, to be fair, they were also a cut above the other 6 that closed down. I'll put it this way. I haven't been to any Russian cafe in Herceg-Novi more than once. That is, I went there once and I didn't feel like going back a second time. Why? Well, at the very least, there's always at least one of several issues that I'll mention now, and often all 3 at once. First of all, the food is, frankly, not tasty. And that's in most cases. Only once did I see a Russian cafe where the food was actually delicious, where in all the years I've lived in Montenegro, I had the best sushi. But at the same time, since it took them a whole hour to serve us, that sushi, I don't know how long they were preparing it, but it took an hour to serve it to us. So I didn't go back there a second time either. And so in every cafe, there's some kind of issue. First of all, usually the food just isn't tasty. Second, as I just mentioned, the service is bad, but that only happened in one cafe. Third, the portions are often small. One time I went to a Russian cafe, ordered a single portion, and left still hungry. Man, I thought that's just not what I'm used to. That is, those who live in Montenegro know that here, well, maybe not in every cafe, but at least in most the portions are very large. They range from just big to absolutely huge. Sometimes you leave so full that, well, you might not even need to have dinner later. It's not just that you have lunch and then you're set for dinner too, you've basically had a snack for later as well. Here, third prices, People come here and often start setting, I don't know, what seem to me like Moscow prices, probably. Like in Moscow, restaurants charge this much, so here we'll do the same. They don't take the local specifics into account either. Well, for example, here you can get a big slice of cake, of course. Cakes vary, but let's say the average price is about €1.80 to €2 for a pretty large slice of cake. A Russian businesswoman comes here, opens a coffee shop and says, all Montenegrins make things that don't taste good, but I'll make things that taste good. Of course, I'll use real ingredients, so mine will be more expensive. Well, it's clear how much more expensive, exactly. Question. She makes these tiny little round things, about 8 times smaller than a slice of Montenegrin cake. And she sells all of this for 3, well, not 3, how much? Well, for twice the price of that Montenegrin slice. Naturally, Montenegrins come in and have no idea what this is. Over there, you can get a slice of cake like that for €1.80, and you're selling me this little thing for €3.50. Why would I buy it? Okay, if it were amazingly delicious, maybe, but honestly, I didn't really notice any difference. Even though the owner says, mine is the best, mine is made from real ingredients. I don't know exactly what ingredients, but honestly, the Montenegrin cake tastes better. That's it. So, those were all the reasons. Seriously, I've never gone to a Russian cafe more than once, in all the years I've lived in Montenegro. But now, let's go through the myths I mentioned. To make sure I don't forget them, I'll read them out. So, the myth is that Montenegrins eat the same thing all the time and don't accept any kind of diverse food. In other words, opening an Italian, Mexican, or any other kind of restaurant here is supposedly pointless. Guys, before you make such claims, at least come to Podgorica. I think the same Montenegrins live there. Not Italians or Russians, but Montenegrins. And in Podgorica, there are a huge number of different restaurants: Turkish, Arab, Italian, Chinese, Japanese. Well, in my opinion, there's something for every taste. Why aren't there any on the coast? It's true, on the coast, all the restaurants are more or less the same. Yes, there are a few here and there that might be a little different, but for the most part, they're the same. Why is that? I thought about this question for a long time, and I figured it out. It's because there are a huge number of tourists on the coast. At the peak of the season, particularly in Herceg Novi, in July and August, the number of tourists is about twice as high as the number of residents living in Montenegro or in that region. There you have it. What percentage of restaurant revenue comes from tourists on average over the year? I don't know, maybe 30%, maybe 50%, but it's safe to assume that in any case, this percentage is huge. And what attracts tourists more? Do tourists need, say, Mexican restaurants there? Yes, I think not. They can find those Mexican restaurants back in their own Moscow or Kiev. It's nothing new for them. They need either national restaurants, that is, mainly restaurants where meat dishes are served in the traditional Montenegrin style, or they need restaurants that offer the most popular dishes that all tourists know and love, for example, pasta, spaghetti, pizza, and so on. Pirozhki, tortillas, well, something like that. And in addition, plus soups and some meat dishes. So, accordingly, that's why most of the restaurants that open on the coast are either in the national style or in this kind of mixed style, which you could call, well, Mediterranean cuisine, where the most famous and most popular dishes among tourists are featured. This is a completely logical step. If I were to open a restaurant on the Montenegrin coast, most likely I would do something similar. If I wanted to stand out somehow, to open some kind of unusual restaurant, I would open it in Podgorica. There are no tourists there, well, or rather there are some, but relatively few. There, you really need to attract the local population with something people who have become spoiled, who are already used to various restaurants, and they need to be offered something new. And there, it probably makes sense. On the coast, I think that opening something new is not the safest idea. So, what was the second myth you mentioned? Friends come by, that is, when you open a cafe, if you're Montenegrin, a large number of people come to you, kumovi, godfathers, brothers, in-laws, friends, and so on. Friends, if you've ever had a business related to food service, I have, then you know all these friends who come to you and mostly drink for free or almost for free, or say, put it on my tab, I'll pay you back someday, and it's awkward for you to refuse them. You know, if they don't come to you, thank God for that. You've actually gained a lot compared to the Montenegrins. Those poor guys are really stuck. Crowds of friends come to them eating and drinking for free most of the time. And it's very hard for them to refuse to say, guys, don't come here or pay up. Here, yes. And the third myth, Montenegrins won't go to a Russian cafe. They only go to places run by their own people. Now tell me, I hope you consider yourself a rational person. Let's say 2 cafes have opened. One of them is good and it was opened by a foreigner. The second cafe is bad and it was opened by, say, Uncle Vanya from the next neighborhood. Which one would you go to, the good one or the bad one? I think you'd go to the good one. You don't care who opened it. Moreover, it's not even written on the cafe's window, to be honest, who opened it. That is, most people who go to a cafe don't even know who the owner is. And they really don't care who owns it, they just go there because they like it. So friends, what I want to say is this. I've said many times that the restaurant business and really any business related to food and public catering is a very interesting topic in Montenegro. I stand by my words, despite the fact that, as I just mentioned myself, there have been a lot of negative cases in Montenegro. I am convinced that the restaurant business, if everything is done correctly, can be successful. And it doesn't matter who opened Ita Montenegrin or a foreigner. But you have to understand that the restaurant business is a very delicate thing, probably the most delicate business among all possible options, where it's extremely important to do everything right down to every little detail. That is, you need to get the interior design right, properly put together the menu, set the prices correctly, and choose the right stuff. In short, there are a lot of little things that will have a huge impact on the final result. But if you do everything right, then your business will be, at the very least, no worse than that of successful Montenegrins, many of whom, of course, there are also new entrepreneurs, but many Montenegrins have been running their restaurants not just for years, but for decades. And none of them go bankrupt. None of them close down. They operate calmly and successfully both during the season and off season. Even now, we see that there was, so to speak, an epidemic, and restaurants suffered the most. They were closed twice. How long has the epidemic lasted for us now? Well, over a year, about a year and a half. During this time, they were closed twice. But nevertheless, even despite this, despite the situation, I don't know a single cafe that has ceased operations. Thank you all for your attention, and goodbye.